Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Can we get serious now?
One thing that did happen during the 60s was some music of an unusual or experimental nature did get recorded and did get released. Now look at who the executives were in those companies at those times. Not hip young guys. These were cigar-chomping old guys who looked at the product that came and said, I don't know. Who knows what it is? Record it, stick it out. If it sells, all right. We were better off with those guys than we are now with the supposedly hip young executives who are making the decisions of what people should see and hear in the marketplace.
Success in the music business begins with a dream, a vision. This podcast will give you, the listener, the insight and tools to turn that vision into a reality. Meet the industry professionals who work day by day behind the scenes, helping to make those dreams come true. Welcome to the business side of music.
On the show with us today here in Nashville, Tennessee, very excited about this guest. It has been a few weeks in the making, and he actually took the time to fly back to Nashville to be on the show, and that is something I truly appreciate. Aarash Darroodi is sitting across the podcast table from me. He is the General Counsel and Executive Vice President with Fender Musical Instruments. Did I get that right?
Absolutely. Such a pleasure to be here, Bob.
Thank you so much for being on the show. When I read an article on you that the American Bar Association had, I was like, holy cow, this young man, this gentleman, you have been through quite a bit in your life already. You started out, you were born in Houston.
Yep.
But you were raised in Iran.
Yeah, that's right.
And you were over there when it wasn't such a great place to be residing in.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Really, it's a matter of just complete circumstance. I was born in Texas because my parents were students at the University of Texas. The goal was that they were going to finish their schooling and ultimately go back to Iran. I'm born during the time that they're finishing up their schooling, and 6 months later, there's a revolution. So they had to make a decision. Do we stay in the United States, or fundamentally do we go back to Iran? And they knew that they couldn't go back because the situation had gotten really bad politically. But they also were students, so they didn't have work visas. They couldn't support a 6-month-old child. My grandparents, who happened to be in the United States at the time, made a suggestion, said, well, why don't you let us take him, being me, to Iran, because I was a U.S.-born citizen, U.S. passport, and I could go back and forth as I please. You guys figure out your visa situation, get your apartment in order, and you'll summon him back and we'll bring him back. They really didn't have much of a choice, right. So they accepted. I went to Iran when I was 6 months old with my grandparents. Upon getting to Iran, a couple months later, all-out war breaks loose between Iran and Iraq. I actually got stuck in Iran for 7 years.
Wow.
Took my passport, couldn't leave. And it wasn't just the fact that you're separated from your parents. It really goes back to the fact that there's a war going on. You know, we have this incredible luxury here in the United States in the sense of, knock on wood, really, there's never been a war on our soil. It's quite a different experience when you're there in person.
Growing up as a young man, did you have an inclination that you wanted to become an attorney? Or, from what I understand, you actually went to school to become an accountant?
That's right. So both of my parents ended up becoming accountants, and they got a job. And the influence from them was, you got to study something that's stable. And I said, fine. I studied accounting, and I took the CPA, and I became a CPA. But I said, I think I want to take it to the next level. There was a book that I read called Barbarians of the Gate.
Oh, great book and great movie.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
With I think it was with Garner. He was the lead actor in that. James Garner was the lead actor in the film. It was about the RJR Nabisco leverage buyout. And I just fell in love with it, that there were all these lawyers working on these exciting transactions and acquisitions. And I said, I have to do that. That's what I want to do.
Yeah.
And so I decided to go to law school, and life took a completely different path from there.
When you graduated from law school, to get from that point to where you are today, which is obviously General Counsel for Fender, what was that path like for you?
Bob, I get that question a lot, because the first thing that I always hear when people hear that I'm executive vice president, general counsel of Fender. They're like, wow, that's so amazing. You're so lucky. And I am absolutely just humbled by the fact that I can work for such an incredible company. It's serendipity. I can hardly explain to you how I ended up where I ended up. I came out of school. It was 2006. It was the real estate crash followed up by the financial crash. The only thing that I could really rely on at the time in order to get a job was my CPA background. So I ended up getting a job as a tax attorney. Although the company was fantastic in the sense that it provided me a sustenance during that time period, I just needed something more entrepreneurial.
Right.
I needed something with a bit more passion in it, a bit more vision, and sort of where we could create. And it wasn't where it was at that organization. So I started networking. I started to go to happy hour spots in Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, as well as Bethesda, Maryland, to see if I could potentially maybe stumble upon meeting somebody that might have an exciting opportunity available for me. And I did that for a course of 8 months and nothing happened. Bob, on the very last day, I said, that's it. Nothing's going to happen. I'm stuck in this tax attorney job working for this insurance company. When I met a person that completely changed my life. So his name was Ralph, and he worked for an ad technology company that basically had 13 other companies all involved in the world of technology. And they were at various stages of their growth, and they were looking for somebody like me. They needed a general counsel. And so I interviewed with them, and they said, we love your energy. And I said, well, I love your entrepreneurial spirit. When do I get started? And I got the job. I was with them for several years, and I was leading an acquisition of a company in Scottsdale, Arizona. So I was stationed out of Scottsdale for about 7 months, did the due diligence, did the acquisition, did the post-acquisition integration when a recruiter at Fender reached out to me on LinkedIn. Just unexpectedly, one day reached out and said, hey, we see you're here in Scottsdale. We love your tech background. Would you be interested in interviewing for Fender? I said, Fender's in Scottsdale? Why would Fender be in Scottsdale? You would think it would be Nashville, Los Angeles, New York, or some other major cities such as that. And said, I need to double check this, do some fact checking first. So I looked it up and I realized, oh, wow. It was at the time, its headquarters was in Scottsdale. And so I immediately responded to her and said, absolutely, I would be interested in interviewing. So this was exactly at the time that Fender was investing significant amount of money in growing out their digital presence. So direct-to-consumer e-commerce, digital applications, digital learning tools, and they didn't have an attorney that could speak tech. I happen to speak tech because that's the area that I came from. Interviewed, and I got the job on the spot. 8.5 years later, I'm with the organization as their GC.
Wow. That's quite the journey that you've taken.
Yeah.
And of course, since you started with Fender and where it's at today, the industry as we know it has changed dramatically. One of the things that you and I bounced back and forth in our conversations leading up to this was how Metaverse is really revolutionizing the music industry. And that is kind of your sweet spot. And I want to talk about that a little bit. But I want to go back even a little bit further, and that is when you were growing up as a kid, you really loved certain artists that I read. Buddy Holly was one of them, Jimi Hendrix, the cats that played Fender instruments.
Yep.
You never thought back then that connection would be made, did you?
No, not at all. I mean, if you can imagine being separated from your parents and you're stuck in Iran, all of the movies come from the United States, and they're watched in Iran, and they're loved in Iran. All of the music comes from the United States. This sort of perception in the mind of me as a child was, wow, what is this United States that it's some sort of Elysium fields that not only all of the movies and the music comes from there, but your parents are there too. So it really instilled this incredible love for American culture at a very, very young age. And 100%, yeah, the music, American music overseas, even in the most politically challenging countries you can potentially think of, it's number one, without question. It is consumed at levels that you can't even imagine, and it's absolutely loved. That generation, particularly the generation that was part of the revolution and grew up during that time of the revolution, like Pink Floyd, is like a religion to them. It's growing up, my father, my uncles, everybody was completely enamored by Dark Side of the Moon.
Did you come from a family that had a music background?
Music was a very, very important part of our home. I mean, we had pianos, organs, guitars, accordions, all sorts of instruments abound. And, you know, from a young age, we sort of learned that life without music is simply black and white, and music gives the world a bit of color, if you will.
Were you playing an instrument? Did you learn back then as a kid?
I didn't actually learn until I came to the United States. And I didn't learn the guitar being my first instrument until I went to college. I learned the guitar, and the guitar led to the piano, so I also learned the piano. But, you know, not just the fact that I work for Fender, but I just love the guitar. I just think it's an incredible, incredible instrument.
Well, you're talking to someone whose one of his very first instruments was a Fender Precision bass guitar.
Ooh, I love it.
Which is what I played back in junior high and high school. And I wish I still had that instrument because it was a great axe.
Yeah, yeah.
On the show with us today here in Nashville, Tennessee, sitting across the proverbial podcast table from me, Aarash Darroodi.
Hey, this is Don Muskies, production manager for Alanis Morissette, and you're listening to The Business Side of Music.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music.
As a musician, you have a dream, that vision of what success looks like for you. Though it's not only about the money, money is part of it. Whether you've been extremely successful or you're just striving to maintain a regular cash flow, you need a plan. Money Concepts can help you develop a customized plan to achieve the financial stability and success you want. For over 40 years, Money Concepts has been providing holistic financial planning services to individuals, families, and business owners. As an independent firm, Money Concepts and their associates are committed to always represent the best interest of the client. It's really about a committed, benevolent interest in them personally. This independence, coupled with that committed, benevolent interest, means they represent you, the client, not a product supplier. It's not about selling products, it's about helping you achieve success. To learn how this can benefit you, contact my buddy, John Adams, with Money Concepts at 737-867-9309. That's 737-867-9309. You can also email John at jadams@moneyconcepts.com.
Whether you consider yourself a musician or not, music is all around us, and it affects our everyday lives. Whether it's background music influencing our shopping habits in a store, organ music adding the vibe to a baseball game, or a playlist convincing us to keep going on that last mile of a run. I'm Mindy Peterson, host of the podcast Enhance Life with Music, where we take a holistic look at music's benefits through the lens of science and medicine, entertainment, and business. You can find me and Enhance Life with Music at mpetersonmusic.com/podcast or wherever you get your audio.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music.
Back in the studio here in Nashville, Tennessee, sitting across the podcast table from me is Aarash Darroodi, who is the General Counsel and Executive Vice President for Fender Musical Instruments. You got the gig at Fender. Was that something that you had an idea of what it was? You talk about that you speak tech, which I think is rather important these days because the world is changing constantly. Is that something that you had to acclimate yourself to going to work for Fender, or was it a fairly fast ramp up to kind of get things moving?
No, 100%. First of all, if you've ever worked outside of the musical instruments industry and world, you only have a notion that, well, these are companies that manufacture these instruments and they're kind of cool and they're music related. And that's really the extent of your knowledge. When I started working at Fender, what I learned is the absolute passion that exists. The people that work within the company at all stages, it doesn't matter whether it's in the C-suite or it's in the mailroom, there is such a passion for the instruments and music as a whole that was really eye-opening to me.
When we talk about Fender, of course, it goes back to the days of Leo Fender in the 1950s.
Yep.
In Fullerton, California, almost hand-building those guitars back in those days. I would imagine that that mindset is probably still in place with the employees of that company?
100%. And you have folks within our manufacturing facility that have been with us for 40, 45, 50 years.
Really?
I'm not aware of any other industry and employer that has multiple decades of employment, and it's also multi-generational. We've had one point we had grandfathers whose sons worked there, and then their grandchildren worked there as well. So that's something that's incredible and quite unique.
Now that we're transitioning into a whole new era of how music is being created, how it's being distributed, we've gone from the physical platforms of record stores. Now music is being streamed for the most part. How is that affecting the music manufacturer, someone such as Fender?
I think it's actually incredible for us. Essentially what it has done is that it's provided access to individuals to listen to music, what we call the back catalog, right? Access to back catalog that otherwise they would have never really been able to listen to. Example, Gen Zers would really not know about the Byrds or Eric Clapton or Pink Floyd, as we were discussing earlier, without really access to, say, Spotify or other music streaming apps. So what it does is it actually opens up their aperture and it opens up their lens to the potential of music that existed before. So there's that piece. Piece number two is the fact that you have a completely new generation that's coming up and appreciating the fact that the guitar is not only part of music history, it's part of American history. That's the thing that really stands out to me. I'm a passionate person about not only American history, but world history as a whole, is that when you take a look at Fender, Fender is not just about a guitar. That's not what it's all about. This represents American history. It's a piece of American culture. When we sell this product, whether it's in the domestically in the United States or we sell it abroad, every guitar that you're buying a part of American history. And this was born in the U.S., and it will always continue to be really part of the fabric of America.
With the whole metaverse that's now taking place, how is that changing the business model for a company like Fender?
Yeah, I think what's exciting is when I came to Fender, again, I came from a tech background. So I could bring with me a completely different perspective on sort of what the business can be for the future from a tech perspective. That helped me sort of work with the digital teams and the marketing teams that were working on the next generation of products. Fender is always in a state of evolution. And I think that's one of the reasons for, perhaps the main reason for success is that it constantly evolves. It doesn't really stick to one particular genre of music or one particular era of music or that evolution of the instrument itself. It's constantly looking at where are we currently and where are we going. I think when you think about the metaverse simply is going to be an extension of what makes us human. So if you think about it, going back in history, we tended to sort of go and gather around the fire. It was bonfires. At bonfires, you would share stories, and as instruments started to be created, we would sing and we would play the instruments and share the stories through song.
Right.
That ultimately evolved to the radio, and we started to surround ourselves and surround the family around the radio. Then it became the television. We continued to surround ourselves around the television. Anytime that you create the opportunity for humanity to come together socially, and you create that environment, that is a natural evolution and course of where we're going as humans. The metaverse is going to provide that. Essentially, when we talk about creating an environment, albeit not in the physical world, but in the digital world, where individuals come together, they can continue to share their stories and share their music and share their passions and experiences with somebody who's thousands of miles away across the other side of the world. That's what's exciting about the metaverse. And if you think about it, Bob, in today's day and age with advanced technology that we have in our homes, we have heating systems and artificial intelligence heating systems and all these things. Why do we still have fireplaces? Because it's a vestigial trait. It's within us. It's part of us. We always want to gather around a central focal point to share our ideas and stories.
It's a gathering place for the family and friends.
Yep.
I get that. How do you think the live music scene, because obviously Fender has had a huge part in that, some of the artists that we named, I mean, when you look at the entertainers that are out there performing, going back, to my era, the baby boomer eras, 60s and 70s and 80s, the Fender Strat, the Fender Tele was the preeminent guitar that you saw on stage. How is that being affected by the metaverse now? I keep hearing rumblings that shows are going to become more virtual, either through Oculus headsets or whatever that platform's going to be. How do you think that's going to affect the actual live music industry?
That's a great question. I think that naturally it's going to provide access to those folks that otherwise could not experience that concert, that either from proximity, they can't attend it, or they don't have the financial means to attend it. So you're going to be able to provide access to individuals that otherwise wouldn't be able to experience that. However, in no way do I think it's going to replace the incredible sort of experience of being there in person. And a prime example is streaming. So when the pandemic came in, naturally everybody sort of hunkered down and went inside of their homes and basically was consuming movies and music and everything streaming-wise at rates that we've never seen before. The second that concerts open back up, from what I hear, based on what Live Nation has sort of put out there, the demand is off the charts. Well, there's a reason for that, because you cannot replace it. However, you can still provide that sort of access to individuals that otherwise couldn't attend. And I think that's incredible. Live music has been a part of us as humans for millennia upon millennia, and it will continue to be there. It's just a completely different experience. It's kind of like this podcast experience. We could have done this via Zoom. We would have been able to probably achieve the most basic tenets of what we're trying to achieve, but it's totally different. I can see you. I can engage with you on a different level, 3D.
Exactly. You talk about the pandemic. How did that affect a company such as Fender? How did that affect the physical music manufacturing industry? People had an opportunity to, they were basically self-quarantined. They were not allowing themselves to go out. How did that affect companies such as Fender? Were people still purchasing musical instruments during that time?
Most definitely, because everybody was home and they had the chance and the opportunity and certainly the time to pursue things that they always wanted to do, which was to learn the guitar. So it was an incredible time for us as far as being able to provide instruments to a whole generation that otherwise perhaps might have not picked up the guitar that they always wanted to. That's fantastic. Add on top of that the fact that now they're learning how to play the guitar, because one of our key strategies is we not only want to sell you an instrument, we want to make sure that you actually learn how to play it, because there is a drop-off point where individuals purchase a guitar, they try to learn it, they don't, and they basically quit. It's important for us that we get them over the hump, where they learn how to at least play the basic chords so that they become proficient, and then they stay on and eventually in the future sort of expand their repertoire of instruments. What's amazing, though, what you're going to see over the course of a few years from now is the fact that you had a lot of folks that were creating in their homes. They were not only purchasing instruments and learning instruments, but they were creating music. And you're going to probably see new styles and genres of music that are going to come out that we never thought were possible. I mean, when you take a look at history, historically, rock and roll was something that didn't really exist. It existed in different bits and pieces, but it took certain things that occurred in history in order to make that happen. And I think the pandemic is going to be one of those things that in the future we're going to look back and say, wow, all these people were at home, they purchased all these instruments, and they learned how to play their instruments, and they actually started creating. And we have all these new genres of music we never thought possible.
I want to go back even a little bit further. I remember Rick Derringer, who's known for such hits as Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo and Free Ride, and played with Edgar Winter on Frankenstein, those great classic 70s songs. At one point, he approached me and he said, there's this video game that's coming out. I think it was Guitar Hero or Garage Band. I don't remember which one exactly. And this was early 90s, probably 1990. And we really didn't know much about it back in those days. You really take a game piece. It's not a guitar per se because it doesn't have strings. But Rick was wondering, and I was too, how this would affect the guitar players. Well, as we discussed it, we kind of figured out maybe little Johnny, who learns how to play a song on GarageBand, one of those games, will eventually want to evolve into a real guitar. Is that something that you've seen?
100%. It's about that exposure, and it's also about that inspiration, right? You take a look at the greatest musicians of all time. There was always a point in time in their life that they were inspired by somebody else. We're in Nashville, so we have to talk about the Grand Ole Opry.
Right.
We got to talk about WSM radio. In the beginning, WSM radio, when it was beaming its, I don't even know how many megawatts it was like 1 million megawatts where you could hear country music from space. The young kids that were listening to those initial radio transmissions were folks like Merle Haggard, Johnny Cash, and the list goes on and on, Chris Christopherson. It's that exposure, it's that inspiration that you draw. And gaming is a great form of sort of inspiring, and that's how we got involved in it historically in gaming as well. To kind of bring it back to your previous question as far as the pandemic and sort of music, this has been a fantastic opportunity for us as an organization to allow kids and teenagers and even adults to get that exposure to the guitar and to the music that otherwise wouldn't have happened. So the pandemic sort of was our WSM radio, if you will.
That's a nice way to look at it. In the studio with us here in Nashville, Tennessee, Aarash Darroodi.
This is Courtney Cronin-Dold, comedian and writer, and I should definitely be listening to the Business Side of Music podcast series with host Bob Bender.
You're listening to the Business Side of Music.
Hey, this is Jack Sharkey, host of the Between the Notes podcast. Are you a music fan? Do you still get a thrill from your favorite songs? Are you curious about the history, development, and tech behind it all? Well, then join us each week as we explore that and more on the Between the Notes podcast. Check us out on Facebook at Podcast Between the Notes and find us everywhere you get your podcasts.
You're listening to the Business Side of Music.
Back in the studio here, Nashville, Tennessee, Aarash Darroodi, who is the General Counsel and Executive Vice President of Fender Musical Instruments. Thank you so much for being on the show. This has been great. And during the break, we had a little bit of a conversation about something that you're very passionate about. And of course, being a tech guy helps because it's music creation and artificial intelligence.
Yep.
How do those two pieces fit together?
That's a great question, Bob. So in today's news, you keep hearing about artificial intelligence being used for various things. It can write your essays for you. It can fill out applications for you. And also you can literally type in any text and it creates this sort of photo based on what the AI is computing. So the question that I always get is, will they use artificial intelligence for creation of music? Number one. And number two, will that essentially completely overtake the process of music creation? So to answer that, usually I go back to history. Again, we're in Nashville. Let's talk about rock and roll. So when you take a look at the history of rock and roll really is the love child of that Mississippi Delta music that has very much its roots in the African American slaves that were brought to the United States. And they brought with them not only music, but they also brought with them a very important instrument, which was the banjo. The banjo is from Africa. Then you had the music of Ulster representing Scots-Irish, Scotland and Ireland, where because of political upheavals and potato famine and other undesirable things, they immigrated to the United States from Ireland and Scotland. When they immigrated to the United States, they settled down the Appalachian Mountains and came down and settled in the southern parts of the Appalachian Mountains. And some way, somehow, the music of the freed African American slaves came together with the music of Ulster, which was country music, was what you may call the European fiddling music, and that gave birth to rock and roll. In fact, Elvis sort of touted himself as a country artist. There wasn't really nothing known as rock and roll yet. He touted himself as a country artist. Now, if you stand back and think about how many things in history had to occur for these two genres of music, completely separated by culture and time and history, for these two to come together to create rock and roll, millions of things had to happen. The slave trade had to happen. The creation of the banjo had to happen. The potato famine and religious persecutions in Ireland and Scotland had to happen. All these different things had to happen for rock and roll to be birthed. Now imagine if we use the power of artificial intelligence to potentially simulate the creation of new forms of music. Not just simulations of maybe 5 or 10 different genres. Imagine simulations of thousands of potential combinations of different music. That's the power of artificial intelligence. It's not going to usurp the creation of music, because I always say that art, which encompasses music, art comes from the human emotion. It comes from our pain, our suffering, our love, our highs, our lows. That's where true great art comes from. It'll never usurp it. However, it could be a very powerful tool. Imagine the creation of instruments with the use of artificial intelligence where we never thought possible. The combination of, let's say we take the guitar as we know it and combine it with an instrument in indigenous Australia. What if that creates a sound that we never thought possible? Right? Because in order for that to happen, you would either have to have the indigenous people get exposed to the American guitar, or the American guitar getting exposed to the indigenous instrument. So that's the exciting part of artificial intelligence, which is where can it take us into these uncharted territories and uncharted waters that we never thought possible? And rock and roll is a great example.
Is this something that Fender's looking at?
I think everybody in the music world as a whole is discussing it. I think that musical instruments and sort of the music industry is usually takes the approach that they stand by and just observe to kind of see where the tech goes. And when it settles, we sort of go in and see what works for us and what doesn't work for us. It's always top of mind, any form of technology, whether it's AI or the metaverse and such. But there's a lot to be figured out with artificial intelligence. But the one thing that I must say, and I always reiterate this to folks who have questions about artificial intelligence, the growth of AI is not linear. It's exponential. So if you take a look at where AI was last year and where it is today, it is exponentially more powerful. And where it's going to be 1 year from now is going to be even exponentially more powerful than it is today. That's the exciting part. But once creators get their hands on tools that they can create the new sounds or the new instruments and the new genres of music we never thought possible, I think that's really exciting.
So let me ask you this. Do you feel that technology is ahead of creativity, or is creativity ahead of technology? Or are they pretty much on parallel tracks at this point, if that makes sense to you?
I think creativity is the backbone of technology. I would argue that you would not have Silicon Valley without rock and roll. It wouldn't exist. You would not have Apple computers without Steve Jobs absolutely loving the music of Bob Dylan and other rock and roll stars at the time. It's the backbone of technology. Creativity is a very powerful tool that we have as humans. And I think I would argue that as a country, it's our competitive advantage is creativity, which is why most of the innovations and the technological advancements of the world all come from the United States.
Do you think mankind is still catching up to technology?
I think all the tech that's possible exists in the world. We're just discovering it little by little.
Right,
I think it's already there. We're just stumbling upon it.
Yeah, it's just waiting to be discovered.
100%. Absolutely.
I want to go down another path. One of the things that you're also passionate about, and you're the president of, is the Fender Play Foundation. Can we talk about that for a few minutes?
100%. Absolutely. It is an incredible foundation. We will, by the end of this year, have provided free instruments in addition to free music instruction to 24,000 kids in the Los Angeles Unified School District. Now, why? The reason we wanted to create the program was we just didn't want to fill up a truck full of instruments and deliver it to a school system, unload it at the loading dock, and it ends up in a supply closet somewhere with broken strings and broken dreams, as I always say. We wanted to be able to team up with the teachers. The teachers are absolutely the most critical element of music learning. They're the soldiers in the field, if you will. But as you know, music funding has been on the downward trajectory for decades, which is quite sad. So we decided to approach philanthropy in a multi-pronged approach. Number one, utilizing the power of our brand in order to open up doors. Using product. We supply them with free instruments, electric guitars, electric basses, ukuleles. We team up with teachers, and we also use technology. We use Fender Play. So Fender Play is an online musical instrument learning application that essentially the teachers can utilize and provide it to all of their students. The power of Fender Play is that the learning process doesn't stop once the child leaves the school. It's a digital application. They can access it at home. They can access it wherever they like on their phones or on their laptops. That learning process continues, and the teacher then has the power to be able to see the progress of the child throughout the curriculum. The other incredible aspect of Fender Play, and particularly our foundation's work, is, so I work with a lot of educators, and I work with government officials like mayors and governors in order to expand the reach of the program. The question that I always get is, why should we support music and arts? Why should we support it? You know, budgets are limited. Is there a justification for doing it? The beauty of our program, particularly of Fender Play, is the fact that, yes, you can directly correlate the progress of that student in the application to attendance. You can correlate the progress of that student in the curriculum to their grades. There is finally an objective, measurable mechanism where we can see the positive impact. And Bob, we teamed up with USC, University of Southern California, last year. They loved the program. They said, we want to do a study. And they just published a study in January of this year, which basically found a direct correlation between our work with LAUSD, the Los Angeles Unified School District, and the wellness of kids. Well, that's just fantastic. So you're telling me we can inspire them, equip them, teach them, and also fundamentally it improves their wellness? That's something that I'm incredibly proud of.
Wow. That is such a great thing that you're doing for the schools. Now, LA Unified School District, are you looking to branch out into other states, other communities?
100%. It was in our backyard, so we said naturally to just start right here. But we are right now looking at multiple different areas, potentially Hawaii, DC, Miami, New York. So we're sort of looking for partners in order to go into those regions as well.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Aarash, thank you so much for being on the show. This was
My
great.
pleasure. Thank you so much, Bob.
The Business Side of Music is the creation of Tom Sabella and Tracy Snow and is produced by Bob Bender. The Business Side of Music is recorded at Music Dog Studios in Nashville, Tennessee. Production sound design by Keith Stark. Voiceover and promo by Lisa Fuson.